From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Well, this hour we're continuing our series of conversations with New York State lawmakers, elected leaders, giving you a chance to interact with them. New York State recently passed a budget, and we're talking about what was in it, what was not. We're talking about what state leaders want to achieve next, what their priorities are. And this hour, we're glad to be joined by Assembly Member Josh Jensen, sharing his perspectives on the budget, everything from taxes, childcare, affordability, healthcare, economic development, and more. Josh Jensen represents Assembly District number 134. Right before the program began, I was trying to tell you to. I screwed up your microphone. Yeah, now it's got to come down an inch. Look at this. Look at if you're watching on YouTube. This is scintillating.
Well, that's when you have somebody who's 7'3" on before me. It's going to throw it right off.
Patrick is. I don't think he's 7'3", but he's might be close.
I watched him when he came down the stairs, and I laugh all the time because he had to die. He looked like a giraffe trying to drink water coming through the doorway. Because he's just so tall, and going through the doorway, like you can tell, this is an older building because he definitely had to dip down.
Yeah. This he's the tallest person who's been in the studio in a long time. You're a normal height.
Yeah, I was 6. The joke.
Are you over 6?
I'm right around 6 foot. I can't remember which comedian wrote the joke, but he always said I'm between 5'7" and 6'3", depending on what convenience store I'm leaving. But no, I'm right around right around 6 foot.
Welcome, by the way. Thank you for making time.
Yeah, my
for the
pleasure.
program.
Anytime.
So I'll start with this here. I mean, you're as a member of the Minority Caucus, it's always a challenge when you're working in Albany, and you're up against it on a number of issues. But at the same time, there are places where you're going to find crossover support, bipartisan support, and we're going to talk about some of those issues. In general, is there a headline that comes out of this budget to you? Do you say, "Hey, this is the thing that I think is most important. This is a good thing. This is what I'm worried about." Anything that
Yeah, I mean, certainly this was a weird budget year, not just because it was close to 6 weeks late, but it wasn't really. There wasn't a big outstanding thing that sucked all the oxygen out of the room like we've had the previous 4 budgets that I've been a member of the Assembly for, and that was the biggest change this year. But the thing that was really the most surprising thing for me this year was how many of the budget bills I voted for. For your listeners, the New York State budget is just not one beautiful bill that gets passed.
Not one big beautiful bill.
No, but it's 10 separate pieces of legislation. And we have a separate vote on each of those pieces of legislation. And I actually voted for 5 of the bills this year, which is more than I usually do. And it was mainly because, when I went door to door last year asking for the people of Greece, Ogden, Parma to put their faith in me to be their voice for another 2 years. One of the biggest thing they talked to me about was affordability. That was something that the governor, when she unveiled her budget proposal, really put a bullet point on. And in this year's budget, we actually saw the state taking steps to look at issues of affordability. Do they go as far as they probably should or could? No. But when the state takes steps in the direction that legislators like myself from both parties have been calling for, and more importantly, the people of our state have been calling for, I think that's a good thing, and we should work to say, listen, this is the path we should be going. And while doing that, by having the highest amount of spending in state history was something that I think was a little surprising, but good to see all in all.
Okay, and so let's get a little more specific on when it comes to affordability. So you're talking to constituents. Affordability is a problem, with food, with housing, with the cost of supplies if you're building something, with pretty much everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, the most, and this is the thing, is that I think people's frustration with affordability is really rooted in frustration by and large. They get their property tax bill, they're frustrated by that. They go to Wegmans or they go to Tops or they go to any grocery store and they see the price of produce, they're frustrated by that. They see the cost of cereal going up, they're frustrated by that. They look at their paychecks, they're frustrated by the taxes that are coming out. But all in all, it's frustration. And what I hear more often is it's hard to be a New Yorker. It's tough, especially when they hear from people who live in Tennessee, North Carolina, Florida, other states that are seemingly viewed as no tax, low tax havens. I get a lot of people who I represent saying, why should I stay here anymore? because they think they see opportunity elsewhere. And I think more and more the state can do more, has to do more to show people that we have opportunity right here in New York. And whether that's here in Monroe County, the Finger Lakes, the North Country, Southern Tier, New York City, Long Island, it doesn't matter. We need to make people understand that they can live a comfortable life, they can live an affordable life, they can live a life of opportunity, no matter what color you are, no matter what age you are, no matter what region of the state you call home.
And so when it comes to affordability, what is in these budget bills
Yeah.
that is designed for that? And
Yeah.
take me through good and bad and anything else.
Yeah, so the one I mentioned, I voted for 5 of the budget bills this year, and one of the ones that I voted for the first time, I think, in my 5 years was the revenue bill. Normally, because there is some sort of tax increase in that. This year, that was not the case. This year's revenue bill, we saw a middle-class tax cut. Now, was it the largest middle-class tax cut in the state's history? No. But it has brought the middle-class tax rate for earners, joint filers below $323,000, it brought it to the lowest tax rate in about 70 years. And it wasn't a huge cut. You're not gonna do your filing next year and think, oh my goodness, look at all the money I have now. But it's something. And anytime we can return money back to people, and that's the thing, we talk about tax rates, but we really have to talk about tax takes, because tax rates are just a percentage. But what people actually see is the money that taxes are taking out of the money that they've earned. And I think that's where a lot of that frustration boils to, but they don't understand it because politicians like myself are always saying, well, this is the tax rate, we're doing this, it's percentages, blah, blah, blah.
What happened? Do you think the Democrats thought there were tax increases and you just fooled them?
No, I mean, I think you look at last year's elections, especially at the federal level, and we saw that affordability was essentially what drove a lot of people's voting behavior. And I think, shockingly, politicians respond to demands of the people they represent. And I think when we do that as a way that, this is something in New York that I've heard people calling for, that we represent, I think finally we've kind of taken onus on that. Now, that was only possible because we saw greater levels of sales tax revenue and other money coming into the state than we had before, so we had that flexibility. But I'd much rather see us saving that money with tax cuts than choosing to spend it on reoccurring programming that's going to need reoccurring funding.
Now, getting past my snarky comments about your colleagues in the Democratic caucus, let me ask you a serious question, though. Certainly, there's still a lot of Democrats who want to see more aggressive taxation on the wealthiest New Yorkers,
Yep.
whether you're making $1 million in new revenue a year, $4 million, $5 million more, et cetera. Governor Hochul has said that she is not going to go for that. But there's plenty of Democrats who want to go in that direction. I suspect you do not want to go in that direction.
Well, and that's the thing. We saw in that same bill, we saw the millionaire's tax that's already on the books extended. So we didn't raise the amount of money. We just said, okay, it was due to sunset. We're going to extend it. For me, a tax that's already on the books, we're going to extend. For me was something non-objectionable. I don't have a ton of millionaires calling my office every day asking me to cut their taxes. I also don't have any of them calling me and telling me to raise their taxes.
Okay.
Be honest, I don't talk to a lot of millionaires on a daily basis. But that is, I think, and this is what taxes are the price you pay to live in a civilized society. And, somebody always told me there was a John F. Kennedy quote that I don't think it's real, but I'm going to pretend it is for the part. But the crisis at hand dictates the appropriate response. And if you want services, if you want things, they cost money. And in a civilized society, you've got to pay for that. And the way we pay for it is through taxes. Now, what I think we can do a better job in New York is making sure when we have that tax take, we're spending the people's money in the most efficient and effective manner.
You're sure you're a Republican, though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm a New York State Republican.
You're a New York State Republican. Okay. So this bill and
that's not to interrupt, but just when I was on the town board in Greece, I would go door to door and I'd have a lot of people complain about the taxes in the town of Greece. And I'd say, yeah, but this is what we get for the service. You look at our community and senior center. It's amazing. You look at the programming we have. You want the best plowed streets in Monroe County? It's going to be in the town of Greece. You want to make sure that happens? It costs money to provide that service. Now, where my Republican conservative viewpoint is that you only should take the money you need,
And no more.
depending on what you need it for, because you might have to outlay something for future
Okay,
spending.
sure.
But yes, but you take it for what you need for the programs that are out there, and what the people are calling for. But you also have to have a cost benefit analysis. Is the money you're spending really worth it?
But it's interesting because I think part of what you're doing is you're trying to connect for people. The taxes they're paying, whether it's at the local level, the state level, et cetera, to the services they're getting or should be getting or want to be getting. And I think a lot of people are struggling to see that connection. And I'm not saying that connection is not there.
Yep.
I'm saying that sometimes it does require making sure people do see the totality of this is how we're spending your money, this is why we think it's wise, as opposed to feeling disconnected from that or feeling like I'm just not getting a return on this investment.
Well, and that's one of the things where I've been a little critical of the way the state spends our money, a little sometimes in the economic development perspective. We always look, it seems like, first shot at the biggest, sexiest programs and projects that are coming to the state, spending billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to bring in these employers who are going to maybe create thousands of jobs or hope to. Do they always? No. Are there clawbacks? Sometimes. And those projects are important. You look at what's going on in micro in Syracuse, that's a big deal. It's having a big impact on RIT locally. But one of the philosophies that I talked about is, yes, we need the macro, but we should also be using economic development dollars on micro projects. You look at parts of the city of Rochester where if you build community infrastructure, a neighborhood park, and the state's playing a larger role in saying, listen, we think we can build up vibrancy in impoverished areas of the state, whether they're urban, rural, in between. Maybe economic development is not just based on jobs, it's based on quality of life. And if people have a more comfortable form of living, they're going to want to come here, which goes back to the whole thing about let's give people reason to come to New York, stay in New York.
So I want to talk to you more about affordability in different places. We're going to talk housing a little bit here. But just in general, one of the big reasons that your colleague on the Democratic side, Zohran Mamdani, might end up being the next mayor of New York City is affordability. He's been talking about creating city or publicly run grocery stores. He's been talking about housing in really aggressive ways. I suspect in ways that maybe not perfectly aligned with where your ideas on what government should or shouldn't be doing. But he's talking about, I think where you and he would agree is that people are not feeling like they can afford enough and that there has to be some kind of change. Now, the solutions might be different. Number one, how much do you interact with Mamdani at all? I mean, from a different part of the state.
Yeah, no. So we were both elected in 2020, which is funny that with the exception of Harry Bronson, the entire Monroe County delegation was all elected in 2020. And we came in together. And so when it was, the first 2 years where COVID was limiting the amount of legislators in Albany, we actually spent a lot of time. It was actually, there'd be card games with Zohran and Mike Lawler, which is they look very similar. But yeah, I mean, he's a very personable individual. He's very connecting. He's always got a smile on his face. You see him in the hall. I've been calling him Mr. Mayor for the past 3 months when I see him around. When I saw him in Albany.
You didn't think he was going to beat Cuomo until the end, did you?
No. But that is. But he had a message that resonated with the electorate in the Democratic primary. And when you have so many people, young people especially, turn out, he was able to find a way to connect with them on a message that they were receptive to. Now, I think he's a very intelligent elected official and politician that he was completely beelining for the affordability argument. And I think some of the other beliefs he may have that he's talked about in the past that he didn't necessarily put out there on his great comms operation, I think will be something that a lot of New Yorkers, both in the city and across the state, would be concerned with. But you talk about an issue, city-run supermarkets. Now, I don't think that's the government's job. However, I don't live in a place like New York City where sometimes the only place where you can get food is in a bodega on the corner where fresh fruit and fresh produce is a hard commodity to come by. I have a Wegmans 3 minutes from my house, and I have 3 in my town. So there's not that supermarket grocery store desert like may exist in New York City. I've never lived in New York City. I don't know what day-to-day life is in the 5 boroughs. I know what it's like in the town of Greece and the Monroe County. So he's got a message that resonates. Do I think it's the right message for the entire state? I do not.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see for sure. And it's one of the things we talked about last hour. I mean, if he is elected, and there's still ways to go to November, we're going to learn a lot about whether these ideas work.
Well, and a lot of the things that he's saying he's going to do, he needs the state legislature and the governor to sign off on it.
Interesting.
So he can freeze the rent on the rent stabilized apartments in New York City. He could do the city-run grocery stores. Everything else, he's going to have to get state approval to do. And the governor has already said that she's not on board with some of the tax increases he wants to do. My guess is the majority of the majority would have concerns about those same issues, especially in an election year. So I think it'll be interesting to see how, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. So it'll be interesting to see how, if he is elected come November, how he makes that transition from poetry to prose.
I think it was Mario Cuomo who first said that, but I could be wrong. But regardless,
you know what? They should name a bridge after him.
Very good. See, that's cheeky. Now, you were elected in 2020, so you started in January 2021. I'm trying to remember. Andrew Cuomo was governor until he resigned, in the middle of 21?
August 21.
So in your first year. So when you went to Albany, he was still the governor.
Yeah.
Somebody recently in Democratic politics said to me, they said, nobody likes Andrew Cuomo. A lot of people fear him. Was that your experience?
I'll be honest with you, Evan.
I mean, I know you're Republican. You're not going to hang out with him.
Well,
a lot,
the next interaction I have with Andrew Cuomo will be the first.
one.
Yeah, that I've had as an assemblyman. When I worked for Joe Robach, I would have, when he came to town, we'd cross paths or he'd say hi when I was with Joe. But as an assemblyman, I maybe met him when he came to the lakefront when I was a councilman, and there was the flooding along the Grease Lake shore.
Yeah,
I may have met him at one of those, but as a member of state government, there was never any interaction. But I'll also, I have a great relationship with Governor Hochul's regional team, with the Department of Health, who, being the ranking member of the health department, I interface with them a lot, a lot of state agencies. But there's also not a lot of conversation between the current governor, and myself, which is probably because of the different initials after our names.
Yeah, I mean, maybe so. I'm just curious to know, if that was Andrew Cuomo's reputation, why would you think he was going to win in New York City? Just because of political clout and name?
I'm going to be honest with you. I was shocked he even ran in the first place.
Yeah.
Because he always came off to me as somebody who was hyper concerned about reputation and always never showing weakness. And potentially losing would be the end of his career, as we're probably going to see.
Mm-hmm.
So I was almost surprised he did it in the first place. It's like the old story. I feel like I'm just telling anecdotes a lot today, but it's like the story of the prince who goes around and says, one day I will be king. You don't want to be the king. You always want to be the prince, because one day you will be king. That's almost like what I thought Andrew Cuomo would be like. I could run for mayor. I'm not. I could be the governor. I'm not going to run again. I could do this. I could do this.
I could run for president.
Correct. And never actually pull the trigger, because you don't want to open yourself up to embarrassment and failure. Which
so there's cachet in being the guy who could be anything.
I would think so.
But there's risk in losing. No, that's a really interesting analysis of that. We're talking to Assemblymember Josh Jensen from District Number 134. Let me grab a phone call from Jack in Greece, who is on the line with us. Hey, Jack, go ahead.
Hi, Evan. Representative Jensen, a couple of questions for you and a couple of thoughts. I can recall it was a couple of years ago that the New York State Legislature was going to investigate the decline in population of our state. We're losing representation in D.C. because we have had a declining population. I don't recall seeing the results of that. And I wonder if you could give us an update on that and let us know what changes you've made as a result of that. But to continue, I know this is not under your control. I understand that. But Medicaid costs is included in the great, big, beautiful bill that's working its way back to the House for approval. But as we look at the impact of us and say the impact on me, the impact on others in New York State like me that are in the middle class, and we're looking at if Medicaid costs are removed from people, and I don't want to hear a political answer, because the reality is hospitals are going to have to take care of these people. We're not in some third world country where we're willing to just let people suffer. So they're going to take care of people that are seriously ill. They're going to go to emergency rooms, which is going to drive up costs for the hospitals. So as a result, it might not be tomorrow, might not be 6 months, but what's going to be the impact on my insurance costs, my health care insurance? I carry health care insurance, and it's very expensive. And so you can't ignore that fact. It's going to show up and hit people like me. The wealthy people aren't going to pick up the cost because they'd rather pay for lawyers to find ways to find loopholes. Now that the IRS has been defanged, they don't have the resources to go after the wealthy. That's not going to happen. The burden's going to fall on people like me. So, and also the national debt. The Republican Party has decided that it's okay to raise the national debt by $5 billion so we can give this huge tax
Trillion,
reduction.
I think. Yeah.
$5 trillion. I'm sorry, $1 trillion. And that's going to raise the cost for all of us. And I just don't get it how you want to hand over a bag of money and can support that as a Republican representative, my representative, how you can stand there and support that when we know it might take a while for that to show up. But as we watch our credit rating could go down, which it was threatened to go down just recently, when you add all of this up, how am I going to be better off long term?
All right, Jack, let me just jump in. Let's work backwards here. Now, Assemblymember Jensen is a state representative. You didn't vote on the big, beautiful bill.
No.
Okay.
No, but I will say, and Jack, Jack is one of my 134,000 favorite constituents, so I appreciate him calling in. And I'm not going to give you a politician answer because I'm not a politician. I'm a public servant. But I agree. The national debt, I have tremendous concerns about. One, it's saddling my kids, my grandkids, future generations with unsustainable financial insecurity. We talk about people want services, things cost money, but when you're trillions of dollars in debt, future generations are going to have a harder time fulfilling their obligations societally if they have that debt hanging over their head. Additionally, our debt is a huge national security risk. When you have hostile-esque nations like China buying up our debt, they can turn off the switch and call in that debt anytime they want. And so I do have tremendous concerns about the country's debt load. I'm not a federal member of Congress. I don't have a say on negotiating with the president, with the Senate, with the Speaker of the House. Thank goodness. But I do have concerns. And I do have the same concerns on the impacts of Medicaid, something that I've made clear to my friends in the federal government. Being the Assembly ranking member on the Health Committee, pretty much health policy is the thing I focused on the most during legislative session. And Medicaid is a critically important social safety net. And the state in this year's budget spends $126 billion on Medicaid. 57.5% of that Medicaid spend in New York comes from the federal government. So any reduction in federal resources coming for that program is going to affect us. I think one of the things that we've seen, shockingly, politics being played by both sides, but especially when we hear a lot of the doom and gloom, it is the worst case scenario that if everything happened as bad as it could, this is what it would be. It would be about an $8 billion impact to New York. However, part of that is just $8 billion coming from what the federal government gives us. One of the big populations that would be affected by the action in Congress would be to do with legal immigrants in New York. Right now, there's about 730,000 of those individuals who receive health care through Medicaid funding. About 500,000 of them would come off the federal payment system if the bill passes today or tomorrow, whenever they're going to vote on it. However, that doesn't mean they go complete without health care. A 2001 court case says that the state is obligated to provide them with health insurance. So even though there's not federal money coming for those 500,000 people, the state will have to pick up the dime for that. And that was one of the concerns I had with the budget, that we weren't doing enough to safeguard for the rainy day if these cuts did come to fruition.
How many people do you expect to be impacted on Medicaid?
So the governor's office and the Department of Health is saying 1.5 million.
In the state?
In the state. That includes the 500,000 I just said. But it also doesn't take into effect the biggest part of the population, which is the work requirements, which would mandate that certain people who are on Medicaid would have to either be looking for a job, working, going to school, actively volunteering for 80 hours a month, or caring for a small child. The state has not provided any data on how many of those 1.5 million New Yorkers would satisfy the existing work requirements. So we don't have a true number about the impact. And if people are adhering to those requirements, then the state continues to get the Medicaid funding. So what we're getting a lot from the state capitol is the worst case scenario. The reality is going to be, I believe, not nearly as impactful. But I also understand why people are concerned, especially our hospitals.
Not nearly as impactful as in not as many people losing Medicaid coverage,
Yes,
for the reasons you're describing. And I'm just trying to make sure I understand your level of concern. So you think it's not going to be as bad as we've been kind of told,
yes.
but some people could be affected.
I think it's inevitable when you're taking potentially up to $8 billion out of a program, and you are having, because the way the work requirements work is every month the state has to provide verification. There could be people who fall through the cracks. That's inevitable in a state of 20 million people. That's going to happen. There's going to be hiccups. And so I think that's a concern, that it might not go as smoothly as possible. I don't think the number is going to be as high. But I also think this is why, this, as a state, and this is something I've been calling for 5 years, is that we should be doing more to right-size our existing Medicaid system. And if that means providing premium assistance for people on buying insurance on the marketplace, I think we should be doing more things to get people off of Medicaid, having true eligibility screening. That would have lessened the burden that we're now potentially facing.
On the subject of New York State spending on Medicaid, this is Robert in Fairport. Hey, Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Hey, one thing that really needs to be said about Medicaid is New York is the spending champion when it comes to Medicaid spending. The state portion of Medicaid spending, and this is according to the Empire Justice, let me see, it's
Empire Center.
EmpireCenter.org, $1,800 per capita. That's double the national average of $835. And not only that, the gap has risen. If you looked at this gap in 2019, the gap between the New York State and the next highest state has expanded since that time. And the national average, it's gone from 61% to 82% between 2019 and 2023. So we're spending an insane amount of money on Medicaid. There seems to be no effort to try to rein this in.
Well,
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we do in New York, not just, you look at the population, is that we have a larger population, but we still spend twice as much, I think, as Texas and Florida combined, and they have twice the population we do. Where I think our Medicaid, and I haven't studied their Medicaid system in depth, but we do have a very generous Medicaid system in what it covers. And we continually in the health committee and on the floor vote to expand what could be covered. And they come as one-off piece of legislation. It's very hard when they come before us, when you hear from populations who could be affected, to say, well, I don't want to grant Medicaid coverage for that. And it seems like every health committee meeting I say, well, this is it. I'm not doing any more Medicaid expansion. Then something comes up, it's like, well, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to vote for that one. But that is one of the things, that we cover a tremendous amount of things through our Medicaid system. But the problem is that we don't actually fully fund anything. If a pediatrician accepts more than 25% of their payer mix as Medicaid payers, they risk their doors closing. I think the Eastman Dental School has a 36-month wait for cleaning for Medicaid population, 54 months for dental procedures. And a lot of that is because the reimbursements are so bad that it doesn't make sense to take Medicaid payers within the payer mix. And so that's where, and I don't want this to be the case, but I think I'm hoping that if this is the case where we do see the state affected by the federal action, that maybe next year there's enough oxygen in the room to say, let's actually do a real thorough look at the state's Medicaid system and figure out how we can make it better. how can we make it more effective and how can we make it more efficient?
But does that mean covering less procedures,
I don't
less
know.
things?
I don't know. But I think the New York State legislators in the Senate and the Assembly, we have 2-year terms. The governor has a 4-year term. Any widespread structural changes to our Medicaid system are going to take time, and they're going to be politically difficult conversations to have. And it's just the nature of people who are in elected office. They don't want to do those things. They don't want to do the hard things. Some of us do, but a lot of us don't. And especially when you have 24 months to do the job that you've been trusted to do it. It's tough to sink your teeth into these things.
Well, and then you're running for re-election again. So it's easier to expand coverage than to tighten coverage, maybe?
It's easier to expand coverage for things than it is to actually look at the system and make sure you're doing it in an efficient, effective manner.
Would you agree with Robert and Fairport's description that New York State spends an insane amount of money on Medicaid?
I mean, you look at us spending $126 billion out of a $254 billion budget. Almost half of our state budget is spent on Medicaid. I would say that it is an insane amount of money. Yes.
After we take our only break, I've got some more of your feedback for Assembly Member Josh Jensen. I want to talk a little bit more about health policy. We're going to ask the Assembly member if he was running the government, which he is not. As a Republican in Albany, it's always an uphill battle. But what is on the health policy list that either is happening or, in his eyes, should be happening? We'll talk with him about that. There is a recently passed budget. This is a part of our series of conversations with elected leaders, and Josh Jensen represents Assembly District number 134. We're right back on Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Common Ground Health and its Love from the Start initiative, because caring, responsive adults can have a profound impact on the development of infants and young children. More at lovefromthestart.org. And Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Let me get through more of your feedback before we jump back into health policy. Had a question from a listener, and this dovetails with a conversation we had, I want to say a month ago, it might be 2 months ago now, on this program about Francesco's Law. That would establish violations for the failure to safely store rifles, shotguns, and firearms in the presence of a minor or a prohibited person. It would require the Office of Gun Violence Prevention to collect and analyze stats and other information and data with respect to injuries or deaths of minors resulting from failure to safely store a firearm, rifle, or shotgun. And we talked to pediatricians and those who are supporting it. And from just looking up the state database, I saw you as a no vote on Francesco's Law. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, I think so. Francesco's Law was an interesting one because it came up and it came towards the end of session, so it didn't go through the normal committee process, which that's something we have a limited committee process as it is. We don't have hearings like other states do, so there's not a lot of time to get witness testimony, impact testimony, and it came up very quickly. But when I was reading the bill, and I was reading the existing law and what the bill did, I didn't see a whole heck of a lot of difference between what the bill was doing and what the law already was. It was really just tweaking it around the edges. And whenever possible, taking the time to write new regulations, have DCJS have to reimagine existing regulations when already we have almost identical language on the books. I thought it was going to be a lot of government time for something that wasn't a drastic change that we have to ensure that we're keeping children safe, especially when we're talking about storing firearms in your home. You want to keep it out of the hands of children. I know one of my colleagues talks about all the time about, children's thumbs are too weak, and so a lot of the gunshot wounds come because they're trying to use the pressure to pull the trigger, and it's facing themselves. And that's a story that resonates with me. But on that bill, I didn't see how it would do anything drastically different to improve safety of children than what we already had on the books, which we already have some of the strongest gun control legislation in the country on the books.
Okay, and got a question about SNAP. Wanted to know if you agree with some Republican efforts to roll back what SNAP covers. Now, a lot again, we may be mixing federal and state and whatnot. So
I get it. As the only Republican currently serving in legislative office in the state or federal government from Monroe County, I also understand that this is sometimes the burden I carry on in our community about responding for federal issues.
people will ask you about everything.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this. That email reminded me of a piece I read. I'm just pulling it up now from April in The Atlantic with this headline: Republicans are right about soda. And Nicholas Florko wrote a piece that said public health groups are tying themselves in knots over a Republican crackdown on sugary drinks, and basically concludes that this should be a common ground place. The Republicans and Democrats should be able to come together and say that government benefits to purchase food are not a bad thing. But if you are purchasing food that is causing you health problems, that is a bad thing, and soda should be at the top of that list, and soda should not be covered by SNAP. Do you want to weigh in on that, or do you think that's a
No,
federal...
I mean, I think there has to be more rhyme or reason. I think SNAP should be going for healthy foods. You look at what food banks, especially FoodLink in our own community, the help that they're doing for people who have food insecurity, I think is tremendous. But we should be focusing on the healthiest foods, fruits, vegetables, other produce, healthy grains, things like that. And I don't want to parrot RFK Jr. by, make America healthy again. But I think we can all do a better job of making sure we're eating the healthiest food. I'm a prime example. You look at me on the YouTube broadcast, I don't look like the healthiest person, which the health ranker is a little ironic. And I think that's something that my own family struggles with. I have a Diet Coke with lunch every day and with dinner. So I think SNAP, it's something I'm not getting up in arms or upset about limiting what SNAP money can be spent on.
Okay. So I hope that covers that from listeners there. Joel wrote in to ask about, he says, is new nuclear power in this budget?
It was not in the budget. The governor did give a direction to NYSERDA to build out New York State's nuclear generation capacities. There's an indication that she's going to ask NYSO, which is I think that's the acronym, the state's power generation, to look at building a new nuclear power plant in upstate. That is something that I support. It is the cleanest, greenest form of energy. Provides the most power, well more than solar or wind. We already have nuclear in this community, in upstate New York, the community. And a lot of the communities that already have it are asking for more, that they will happily take a nuclear power generating plant in their community. I think it's the right decision. We should have never, Governor Cuomo should have never closed Indian Point Power Plant down in the Hudson Valley. I agree, and we should be doing it.
By the way, is there political momentum for that?
It's actually when the governor announced it a week ago or 2 weeks ago, she had more platitudes from Republican elected officials than she did Democratic elected officials.
Interesting. So where do you think it's going?
The new nuclear power plant, I've heard Oswego wants it to go along with the three they already have. I heard Chautauqua County may want it. I don't know if Gannett has the capacity to expand for another.
Do you think it's going to get held up in political fights, though, or do you think it could happen?
I think it should happen. I think it could happen, and we have clean energy mandates. This is the best way to accomplish it. If that's what the New York State government wants to do, then this is the best way to do it.
All right. This is Alan in Rochester on the phone next with Assemblyman Josh Jensen. Go ahead, Alan.
Hey, Mr. Jensen. I am a certified ombudsman, and I work under the Office of the Aging, and I'm assigned to assisted living facility. And I'm concerned about the Department of Health regulations regarding diet and the quality of food served. And I think they have not been updated for close to 30 years. And I wanted to bring that matter to your attention, basically.
No, I appreciate that. I think I'm the only member of the New York State Legislature currently serving who's ever worked in long-term care. I worked in a local nursing home, and what I've always said is that our long-term care, air quotes, industry, whether it's nursing homes, assisted living, is not in the 21st century. That's the actual physical space, the way we provide care, the food you're bringing up, Some people do it better than others, which as an ombudsman, you're probably seeing every time you go into a facility, depending on which facility you're in. And so I think that's something where we had a Reimagining Long-Term Care Task Force that the legislature approved 3 or 4 years ago. It has never met. It was an act of the legislature. The governor signed it. She made us do a chapter amendment on it, and then it's never been convened because we had this master plan for the aging to solve all this. But if we would have actually followed through with the master plan for aging, or not the master plan, the Reimagining Long-Term Care Task Force, these are the things that subject matter experts would have been able to share with us. And I continually am frustrated with the Department of Health and the governor's office that never actually came to fruition, especially since the Assembly Minority's appointee from that was somebody from our own community working in the long-term care field.
Anything to add there, Alan?
Yeah, I guess, is there any way, Mr. Jensen, that I, as a citizen and as an ombudsman, that I could somehow encourage that committee to start meeting?
Well, I think it's actually, even though it's never met, it's actually already expired. I think it had a 2-year runway to provide recommendations to the legislature, and it never met, and the 2 years have gone up. But certainly I can, I'll make a note of this now, and I'll make sure that I dig into it, and whether we get an answer now or we wait till the new session, that I will get answers for you.
Alan, contact his office. I'm sure they'll be glad to hear from you. And I say that honestly. That's what they do, constituent service. By the way, just on nursing homes, a couple other points. News 10 NBC has done a series of reports on Waterview Heights. That's up in Shalott. Is that just outside?
Just outside.
Just outside your
Just
district.
outside.
Have you seen those reports?
I did, and I did have a conversation with the Department of Health the last week of session about the steps that they were taking. I do have concerns. I have constituents who have family members there. I have constituents who work there. I've heard from both employees, from family members, and from a couple residents who live there about the issues that are there. That's something that I'm greatly concerned about, and certainly staying in touch with the Department of Health on.
I should mention I have been there and volunteered there myself, and I want to be transparent about that. I mean, not often, but I've been inside there. And so that series of reporting was like a sledgehammer to me, but it wasn't a surprise,
Yep.
I have to say. And so I think, I should probably bite my tongue having been in there. But
I think, and this is one of the things that I'm not gonna talk out of school on the conversation.
yeah,
with the
I got
Department
you.
of Health.
I got you.
But that was one of the things where, with the steps that DOH is currently taking, I would like to know what other steps we have at our disposal to ensure that we're providing the best environment for the individuals who call that place home. And I think that from every indication, I don't have a lot of confidence that it's going to improve on its own. I think just, having DOH say that they can't accept any more residents. Yes, it'll lessen the burden by having more residents there, but that also provides a financial impact, which is going to hurt the ability to invest in the facility, and also doesn't guarantee any improvement.
Yeah. Kudos to Deanna Dewberry and News 10 NBC for outstanding work, consistent work. Wherever you are, you deserve to get your medication on time. You deserve decent meals, and you deserve a minimum standard of care. That's what I'll just say. Beyond that, just in nursing homes in general, how are things going?
Yeah, so things could be better. In last year's budget, we passed an MCO tax, which I talked about on the floor as a legalized federal money laundering scheme. It's where we were going to tax managed care organizations, put their money up for a federal match, give them their money back with a little bit extra as a thanks for doing business, and then use the revenue from that to really fund Medicaid increases for nursing homes, assisted living, other providers. One of the concerns I had last year when we did it was that we had a presidential election coming and no guarantee that a new administration, if it was Republican, would keep the waiver for the 3 years' time, as was. Unfortunately, that was the case. And so right before we passed our budget, the federal government, CMS, and the Department of Health and the federal government said that they weren't going to fully fund the MCO waiver. So we were expecting $3.7 billion in revenue over the terms of the waiver. It's been reduced by $2 billion. So 1.7 billion over the life of it through next fiscal year. And this is the money, this is the revenue we were using to provide increases for nursing homes. And we have no backstop on actually how to ensure that these facilities and these providers are getting the money that we said they needed, that they've told us they desperately need. And even then, it wasn't enough to actually fulfill what you had just said about allowing these individuals in long-term care to have a basic standard of living, because Medicaid only pays about 73 cents on the dollar in New York State nursing homes. And that's something where they have to cover the costs of doing business, whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit, which means they're going to have to raise costs on everybody else who's going there or find alternative revenue streams, which unfortunately is going to mean we're going to have nursing homes, especially in rural areas, close at a higher rate than what we've seen over the past decade.
And so what's the next step in dealing with this? Just hope for a federal solution?
I think I don't expect a federal solution.
So what can the state do?
I think that in this year's budget, and this is something that I did not support, but we gave the Division of Budget authorization to deal with, to move up to $2 billion of money for unexpected shortfalls. The legislature has 10 days to veto it, if you will. I think we're going to have to come back into session, probably sometime in the fall, and we're going to actually have to make tough decisions as a legislature, as a state government, to deal with not having the money or the resources we thought we were going to have, mainly because we didn't spend, we spent over $250 billion and we didn't keep anything extra in reserves to make sure that we could fulfill all our obligations.
But what does it mean to deal with that? I mean, does it mean to spend more? Does it mean to stop spending elsewhere and move money?
If you don't have enough resources, you're either going to have to move money or you're going to have to cut services or you're going to have to raise revenue. And I can't imagine the governor's going to want to make that decision all on her own, especially when she's going to have a credible challenge in next year's gubernatorial election.
Which of those three ideas is best for you?
That the legislature has as a co-equal branch of government has a say in that.
I know, but like, do you want to raise revenue? Do you want to cut services?
I'd have to see what the proposal is.
Okay. But the status quo is not going to work on this.
I mean, we shouldn't tell people we're going to do 1, 2, 3, and then fail to do 1, 2, 3. If we told people, we've gone around and we've sent out press releases saying we've did all these things, then to not fulfill our obligation or promise.
You're saying there's an obligation.
I think there's an obligation.
Okay. I got to move fast now here. Early intervention is something that, as we've talked about in this program, is something that is personal to you.
Yeah.
And it's also very important to you. And it's also something that seems to be bipartisan, and yet, once again, nothing happens.
Diddly squat.
Diddly squat.
Diddly squat. We did, I think last year, we did a study bill to look at figuring out what the true needs are. Certainly it's going to be different based on where you are. Certainly the workforce is different depending on where you are. I think, living here in Monroe County, having advocates like the Children's Agenda, Rochester Hearing and Speech Center, who are tremendous advocates, do tremendous work, especially Rochester Hearing and Speech. I think we have a greater understanding about what the need is here than maybe some other parts of the state do. But I think my hope is that study comes back sooner rather than later. We actually know the true impact so we can go into next year figuring out what we actually need to do to solve the problem. I did get a little frustrated at the health budget hearing when I was supposed to be asking a question to Bridget Hurley, and I really just ranted for 3 minutes and didn't ask a question. But the failure to solve the systemic failures of early intervention in New York State is probably the single most frustrating thing I've encountered in my 5 years in state elected office.
Isn't there bipartisan agreement
Yeah.
on this issue?
Yeah.
And yet nothing happens.
No.
Who do you blame?
Everyone. Is the
governor's office, OMB?
Everyone. I blame everyone. But I think this is where it's also difficult, is that the people who this is helping, they both literally and figuratively don't have a voice. We're their voice. But it's not that there's always something bigger or sexier or more crisis of the hour that kind of jumps ahead of them, which is frustrating because going back to the thing we talked about, spending things cost money. It's cheaper to spend money today than it is to spend it tomorrow. And when you can spend money on early intervention, you're saving money down the line. I had a conversation with Rochester Hearing and Speech about they don't have Medicaid. They don't get reimbursed for providing hearing aids for their Medicaid population. So if they have to provide a hearing aid for somebody, there's no way to pay for it. if that's not a failure, I don't know what is.
Let's talk in 6 months, 12 months, and see if anything changes.
I might have less. I may have higher peaks and a bigger bald spot in the back of my head by then. But
And I apologize, Mr. Assembly Member. We're down to the last minute,
Yep.
but take this last minute and tell listeners what can be done about the cost of medicine.
I mean, I think this is one of those things where it's always, you talk about the cost of healthcare, cost of medicine is you have a tremendous amount of competing interests. You have the health plans, you have the hospitals, you have the doctors, you have the pharmaceutical industry, and you have the patients. And so you're looking at, 5 different pressure points, and nobody really wants to give up the high ground on it. And so if we're really going to talk about the cost of medicine, everybody has to come down and sit at the table along with government and say, okay, how do we make this work? Because the system we have is not sustainable. You look at the EDs at our local hospitals. They're overburdened. They're overrun. They look like MASH units. You go through there. That's not acceptable. You don't have places to safe discharge people. We have to do something. And I think that's where everybody has to kind of say, listen, we all have to give a little to ensure that everybody has access to healthcare. And I think that is the small d democratic way to do it, is that let's all sit down together and not play favorites based on X, Y, or Z.
Can something happen this year on that?
Probably not next year. Hope it would be next year, but maybe that's part of a Medicaid conversation as well.
I want to thank Assemblymember Josh Jensen, who's always generous with his time for this program, talking about the state budget, what's in it, what's not, the priorities he would like to see. It's part of our series of conversations with New York State lawmakers. Always good to see you. Thank you for making time.
My pleasure. Anytime.
And from all of us at Connections, thank you for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being with us, whatever platform you're finding us on. We're back with you tomorrow on member-supported public media.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.